Hi, I've been cutting stones into semi-precious and precious gems since I was just a little kid. And I thought I'd show you the steps that were required to make a beautiful pair of stones for some earrings that I'm going to show you how to make in my next video. I just love how relaxing it is to take a rough piece of turquoise like this and then cut it into a beautiful gemstone like this. I'll show you some close-ups of the process through my kind of crude footage I'm using with my phone camera, but I think you'll be able to get the idea. Let's get started. Now the piece of Royston turquoise that I plan to cut into some stones for my earrings is actually kind of rather thin. So I'm going to need to make the stones what we call backed turquoise cabochons. A lot of cutters will back their turquoise that's real thin with some material kind of like a bondo they use for auto bodies. I, however, like to mount mine to actual thin wafers of jasper that I've collected out in the desert. And then it just, to me, makes it much more stable and classy. It'll give the stones the thickness and stability they need to make some awesome earrings. So first thing I have to do is slice some thin wafers of some jasper to go onto the back of this stone. I'm slicing some red jasper from the Mojave Desert in my 12-inch Lortone song. I'm making it about a 1/16 of an inch or maybe 1.5 millimeters. Let's turn it on. Here's a couple different slices. Some turquoise needs especially thick pieces. You can see the one on the right is about 2.5 millimeters. The one on the left is about 1.5 millimeters. And you can see with the thin turquoise slab how it will fit and actually make a nice height. Here's a piece of turquoise already mounted with epoxy to a wafer of jasper that I've slabbed. This one's ready to go. For our piece today, we're going to use the trim saw and saw the blanks out of the slab that's been glued up. Now I'm ready to use a template, to use a Sharpie to mark the oval stones I'm going to use from the piece of turquoise I've cut out of the slab that was mounted on the jasper. And I'm making about 8 by 10 millimeter stones for this project. And as you can see now, I need to go back to the trim saw and do some further cutting. Now this saw, I like to use eye protection as well as hearing protection because this saw is very noisy. It runs with water and you need good light. You want to keep those fingers out of the blade, but you need to get pretty close sometimes when you're trimming. So that's the reason for having good light. And while the blade isn't toothed like a wood saw blade would be, it could still do damage to your skin if it got into your finger. So safety is always a concern. Here's one of the blanks ready to go. Now I'm going to use super glue to mount each Cabochon gemstone blank to the top of a screw head that I have drilled into a wooden dowel. And this is going to create a nice handy way to hold on to the stone while I'm going through the grinding and polishing processes. So this is my system. Some people use wax. I don't like wax. The thing with the super glue is you do have to use some kind of form to get the stone off, and I'll explain that later. Here I am doing the initial grind on my gemstones. I'm going to start with the 100 grit. Actually, I think this is an 80 grit diamond wheel on my 8-inch machine. And of course, all operations of cutting stones are done with water flowing. This is what makes lapidary machines so expensive, is they have to have a ability to have the water flowing through them. Now I'm doing the final shaping on my 220 grit wheel, and you get it pretty close on that. And I'm going to skip right over to my 600 grit sandpaper But before I do, I want to make sure my stones are pretty much exact. And you can see the jasper mounted on the back of them there. And they have a pretty good look to them. They look pretty similar. Earrings, the stones need to be the same. Now here I've skipped right over to 1200 grit. I found out these stones were natural and that they actually were pretty soft, so I'm not going to do 600 grit. I'm going to do my final sanding on the 1200 grit wheel. Now we're going in for the polish. I'm using tin oxide on leather. And I like to keep the stones cool and keep them lubricated with some water and the polishing compound as I'm doing the final polishing on these. And you can see I want to get all around the edges of the stone until I have a nice even gloss. This is some nice turquoise. I found out that it's natural. You can smell it when you cut it if it's been stabilized because you can smell the resins, but these stones are actually natural. Now I'm going to use heat using my small pencil point torch to just loosen the glue that's holding it onto the screw from my dop handle. And you want to make sure the stone doesn't get hot. And I just use a box knife to scrape any remaining super glue residue off the back of the stones. Just take care that you don't gouge your finger using the tip of the blade. Now these stones are ready to mount in some beautiful sterling silver. I'll post my link for my next video on the comments.